Hey everybody, welcome back to the Words of Life podcast with Kevin Bruni and myself. This is day 63 in our weekly recap. And I think we read this last week Luke 17 through 23. So we're looking forward to a great discussion with Kevin. But before we do that, hello Kevin.
Hey, how you doing, Adam?
Hey, anything new with you this week? How you doing?
We're just getting through the last week before we go on spring break, so
Okay.
that's always a challenge to keep kids on task, right? They always want to think that spring break starts on Monday before spring break, right? Not at Friday afternoon when the last bell rings. So yeah, it'll be an interesting, fun week, and then we get a couple weeks off, so that'll be nice.
Yeah, it's crazy. So because of like weird weather, snow and rain and crazy wind and things like that, and some holidays mixed in there, Noah has had yet to have a full week of school.
Yeah.
Since coming off a winter break.
Okay, yeah.
Until last week, and he was really upset. He's like, a whole week of school.
Had to go all 5 days, right? Man, that's rough. Rough, yeah.
And then spring break's also coming. I think just one more full week, and then it's spring break for him, I think.
Okay, so he's on the same time as we are, then it sounds like.
Yeah, I think so. So it'll be fun. But he's about to start. He's got his first track meet tomorrow.
Yeah.
He's running in 3 events: the 4x800 relay, 1600 or the mile, and then the 800. So he's got those 3 to look forward to, and he's all like anxious today. He's like, I'm in my head. I'm gonna do horrible. I'm like, dude, you grew like 6 inches since last year. You've been training. You're gonna be fine. I think.
Yeah, I think our track team had their first meet like maybe last week or something like that out here. So, yep, that's the season. It's spring sports season here too, which means there's kids missing all the time.
Yeah,
because you got track, beach volleyball, boys volleyball, softball, baseball, tennis. I'm trying to think of what else. But yeah, it's like every day I get emails saying like, "Oh, excuse the track team at the beginning of 7th period. They'll be gone for excuse though." Yeah, every day it's 4 or 5 emails about which teams are out.
Yep. Well, regarding our discussion this evening, and Kevin and I will both confess to you that at this point in our reading, so we've tackled Matthew, we've tackled Mark, we're almost done with Luke, and we're like, it seems like we've been reading the same stuff. What do we talk about? And obviously there are some differences in the way Luke arranges his recounting of the gospel. We know that he has done the research, and he's gone back and he's trying to catalog all of these things from all the eyewitnesses and all the stories that he's collected. But at the end of the day, he did an excellent job, and he recorded similar information to Matthew and as well as Mark. So that not too much difference, with the exception of a few things. I mean, Kevin has brought out the fact that Luke tends to bring up the financial aspects of living and things like that quite often. I noticed, I don't know if you all did as well, that Luke, because he was a physician, if you'll pay attention to the way he writes, especially when he's talking about people and the type of illnesses that Jesus might have been healing, he's been very specific sometimes because of his knowledge of the human body and the conditions that people actually dealt with and things like that. But without any real super hot topic to discuss that was just rising to the top and saying, oh, we have to discuss about this. Well, we decided we'd just go ahead and basically just go through each chapter and just highlight the main points. If for no other reason, then it's great for us to learn and to remember.
Yeah, what's where.
So it's a great way for us to go through. So picking it up in chapter 17, well, I guess contextually speaking, right? We just got done with some parables. And then Jesus ends chapter 16 with the rich man and Lazarus, which we didn't actually discuss last week at all. People are, scholars, I guess. I'm not that I'm one of them or I've read all of these people, but I've been told that it's unclear. Is this a parable?
Sure.
Or was this a real event?
Is he describing, maybe it's not a real event, but is he describing how things actually are. That this is what it's actually like,
Right.
in the afterlife, or is he somehow just telling them a thing?
He's
they can understand?
using
Yeah,
potentially fictional characters
sure.
to describe how things really are. But it is a very interesting scene that Jesus did put out there. And if you all recall, just a quick recap of that story, there's a rich man who super rich. He's got everything he needs in abundance. There's a poor man named Lazarus who's like a beggar. He has nothing. He yearns for the scraps from this rich man's table, basically. Dogs would come and lick his wounds, and that's how deplorable and how rough his life was. They both die. And we see this scene unfold where the rich man is in torment. He didn't live a godly life, and he's in the afterlife, but he's in torment, in a hell-like situation, weeping and gnashing of teeth and fire, and it's unpleasant. He doesn't like it. And it shows that he's able to see across this great divide, this chasm. And he sees Lazarus there with Abraham.
Yeah. He's able to have a conversation with
and he says,
Abraham.
"Hey, Abraham, over here." I don't know who knows, right? But hey, can you send Lazarus with just one drop of water on my tongue, And go ahead. I mean, I'll go ahead if you want to expand on that. It's a really kind of interesting story that Abraham says, "Hey, you had your shot.
You had your chance. If you won't take it, you didn't take it, right?" And then he turns and says, "My brothers, right? What about them?"
No, you had the prophets. You had,
and they do too. Do
the
with
fathers,
that
and they have them as well. If they wouldn't listen to them, they're not going to listen now.
Yeah, they're not going to listen even when it came back from the dead to tell that story, right? Which is interesting because we were talking beforehand, and you were talking a little bit about when your choir group did A Christmas Carol, right?
Yeah.
And so these ghosts come to him, right, and it changes his life, right? It changes his whole perspective on how he's going to live the rest of his days. And this is like the anti-Christmas Carol, effectively, right? That
right.
What we're hearing here is that Abraham's like, yeah, no, if that really happened and ghosts showed up and talked to your brothers, if they wouldn't listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not going to listen to the ghosts that come back to talk to them either, right? Which is
they will still be Scrooge, unfortunately.
They will still be Scrooge, apparently, right? And it's quite interesting because it is a rich man, and the whole story is almost the anti-Christmas.
I never thought about that. That's hilarious.
Yeah. So you get the anti-Christmas Carol there, but that whole story is interesting because when you kind of look at it, it's tacked right on to how he talks about this idea about when he saw the Pharisees were lovers of money, right? And so the key point of that is, again, this idea that the material wealth that we have in this life is actually a hindrance to entering into the kingdom. It's not a benefit. Right. And this guy here, the way it's set up in the story anyway, the only thing we see about why is the rich man in torment. Like we don't know anything about his life. We get no context from the story about anything other than there was this guy Lazarus that he knew who was outside of his house every day begging, and he did nothing for him, right? Like that seems to be, as far as the story is concerned, that's his one major crime, if you will, right? That he had all this great wealth and he did not look out for those who had none. And so that's Jesus tells the story, and his key point clearly is that he was on the Pharisees because they loved money, right? And so it's interesting there, and we're going to see a lot even in this section. Again, we'll get this parable of the 10 minas, right? The 10 talents, we call it typically in other places. We'll get several beggars, some lepers, some blind people that are healed. Mm-hmm. People that have nothing. We'll get confrontation again with the ruling elite, the Pharisees, the wealthy. There'll be conversations about, is it lawful to pay taxes? All these kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
That'll keep showing up even in this section as we keep kind of pushing through 17 to 23 here today. But it's coming right off of that story, if you will, right?
Yeah.
So as we kind of jump into 17, then there's a lot of stuff you could talk about. I'm always interested in the 10 leper story there, right? That Luke records for us for a couple of reasons, right? There's these 10 that come, he heals them, they ask to be healed, right? He does heal them, and then one of them turns back, and 9 of them, say nothing. And Luke records for us that the one who turns back is, wouldn't you know it, he's a Samaritan, right? And so it's, and the point is made, were none found to return and give praise to God except for this foreigner, right? Yeah. Which suggests that the other 9 were not foreigners, right? They must have been Jews. And that's interesting too, because he tells them, Jesus doesn't actually say you're healed. He just says, go and show yourself to the priests. And I suspect what he's telling them is what we've seen in other places when he's healed a leper before. And he says, you've been healed. He says, go. I think it was in Mark that he heals a leper very early. And he says, listen, all I need you to do is go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifice according to the law of Moses, right? And then that guy goes and he spreads Jesus' fame everywhere, and it makes it hard for them. But here in Luke, he says the same thing. Go show yourself to the priests, I assume, to show them and get... The priest had to do an inspection to see if you were now clean or not, right? And on their way, they get healed. But he tells that even to the foreigner, right? The Samaritan, hey, you go yourself up to the priest as well. And so as they're all going, then, the one turns back and, makes his point. Maybe it's just me as a math guy, hey, 10% are going to show gratitude versus the 90% that won't, right? Is that a hard and fast rule, or is that just in this case, makes the math easy? But it is that idea that, which I've been seeing a lot of lately, right? That in response to the majesty of God and the great things he does, there's sort of two responses. One is to worship, as this one does. He comes down and falls down at his feet, right, and praises God. And the other is to sort of just be hardened in the heart, right? Whether that's, like Pharaoh was when he saw the plagues and it just hardened his heart. Or like these people, oh, great, I've been healed. I must deserve it. I'm just going to go on my way, right? There was no room for them to come back to talk to Jesus and show gratitude or any of those kinds of things. And so it's just, I guess it's just a reminder for me all the time of, what is the leprosy that God is dealing with for you? And are you kind of showing him the gratefulness and the praise that he deserves for that? Or are you just going about your day? So yeah, I'm just always struck by that story there.
No, it's pretty awesome. But, you get into this story about these 10 lepers, and Jesus is teaching his disciples who are following him. It's almost like he's always having two conversations. He's having one conversation with the people, all the people who are following him, like surrounding him, the crowds and the people that need something from her. They're wanting something from him.
Yeah.
And then his disciples who are following him because they believe he's the Christ, and they're following. They're followers, right?
Yeah, they're disciples. They're learners. They're trying to learn from him. He is their rabbi, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
But he talks about the forgiveness, 7 times 7 or 70 times 7. The point is, like, you need to be people of forgiveness, not people that hold grudges.
Yeah.
And they say, whew.
Increase our faith. Yeah.
Increase our faith, right? And then Jesus tells this little story about the mustard seed. Then we have these. So they have this. If you had faith the amount of faith like a mustard seed, small, it could be huge. Then I'm wondering how many times phrases like "Your faith has made you well"
show up.
That seems to be a recurring theme as well.
Yeah.
And I'd like to look that up. It just occurred to me now to try to find it. But that's what he said to the 10 lepers. That's what he said to the woman with the discharge of blood who touched his garment.
Yeah.
That's what he. So your faith has made you well. It's interesting.
Yeah, and there's certainly a corollary there, right? I think that we're supposed to pick up on that. What is it that makes us well, right? What is it that heals us from our sin? Yeah, it's the blood of Christ, but it's your faith in that does that, right? Right. So if you have, we say, could I really move a mountain? Could I really cast this mulberry tree into the sea? And it's like when we talked about it, how the people show up with their friend and he says, your sins have been forgiven. And then just so you know that I can really do that, here, do something a little less important, like a little less magnificent, get up and walk, right? And so it's the same thing. Cast this thing into the mountain. Yeah, that's really nothing compared to forgiving your sins, right? That's really nothing to shaping the world in the image of the kingdom of God. And so, the faith is the thing that's going to do those things. You have that idea, and then immediately after that, you get this story of, not immediately, there's one in between there, but you get this story of your faith has made you well, right? Go on your way, your faith has made you well.
Yeah.
Which, again, maybe is kind of interesting because you have these 10, right? And he says, hey, you 10, one of you is a Samaritan. You don't follow the Jewish religion specifically, right? You don't worship in Jerusalem. You don't believe those priests are the priests. And if he says, go show yourself to the priests, and that guy who's not like, I'm not Jewish, so I'm not going to do that, right? He's like, okay, I'll go do that too, because that's what this Jesus guy told me to do, right?
Yeah.
And so his faith makes him well, even though he's not specifically Jewish, even though he doesn't follow that same temple practice that those other 9 did. But he's willing to trust Jesus. That's what it takes. And so his faith makes him well.
When Jesus said your faith has made you well, the gut reaction is he's talking about the physical healing that just took
right.
place. But is that really what he's talking about, or is it a double meaning?
Yeah,
like,
is it something else? Your faith has saved you.
you have found salvation today?
Yeah, and I think some of the translations actually even render it that way. Your faith has saved you, which again could go either way. I mean, you
Right.
have leprosy, so you have a death sentence effectively, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting story there that is always sort of a good reminder, challenging in the way that it is there.
So we fast forward to 18.
Yeah.
We start off with this what's been labeled as the persistent widow, or the
Yeah.
right. But what is that really? In my opinion, it's a lesson about prayer.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the idea. God will give justice to elect who cry to him day and night. Will he delay long over them, right? No, he will give them speedily, he'll give them justice, right?
Yep.
And so it is that idea of crying out to God in whatever situation that is, whether we think of that as prayer specifically, or, we'll get, for example, in Revelation, we get that picture of the martyred saints who cry out, "How long, O Lord, how long?" Right? They're not really praying per se, like we would think of prayer, but yeah, they're crying out to God, right, in whatever way. And I like how this version renders it in this particular, how Luke does it here. They all say, "Though I do not fear God nor respect man," but because she keeps bothering me, they all kind of do that. But Luke kind of adds it, "I will give her justice so that she does not beat me down with her continual coming," right? Like he just knows the unrighteous judge.
Yeah.
Look, I'm going to give in eventually, so I might as well just do it now because she's going to wear me down sooner or later.
Right.
I might just give her what he wants up front.
Well, and contrasting that between that and God, the perfect judge.
Yeah. God will give it to you speedily, not because he knows you're going to wear him down sooner or later, right? God's going to give it to you just because the message sort of here is that the judge gives it to her speedily as well, right?
Yeah.
But the motivation, let's say, is different, right, between there. And, at the end of that, Jesus says again this idea, "Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth?" Right? And so we get this faith message popping up again, right? Again, in the next chapter immediately after there.
Followed by yet another example of worldliness versus true humility and kingdom-minded.
Yeah.
Right, this Pharisee and the tax collector and their prayers.
Yeah.
Right? So you've got this Pharisee, and so don't think of it just as a cultural thing that happened then, while it did. How many times do we find ourselves performing doing good deeds, maybe even not without realizing it, or maybe without realizing that we have a motivation that's all pointing back
That's
to
about
me.
us, right?
I think one of the largest traps we have these days is the social media aspect of our daily lives. So I'm in business, I'm in real estate, right? So I am told by real estate coaches and everybody in the industry that, to grow it, in order for me to grow my business, I have to be present in social media, and I have to be branding myself in social media to draw attention to my business, or ultimately to me.
Yeah.
I struggle with that. I really do. Now listen, I love performing, and I love being in theater, and I love being in stage, and I love entertaining people. But ultimately, for me, it's more about them than it is for the accolades I may receive, because I just enjoy.
Right. I enjoy bringing enjoyment, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the same reason I love to cook. I love making people happy because they eat something that I've made that tastes good, and they really enjoy it, and they give me I like the thumbs up, and I like the acknowledgement, the fact that I did something well. But being motivated to do things so that other people will see us and glorify us is where it crosses over, and we have to learn how to be mature in this life to be able to do things that glorify God. And if one of the results is we also get praise or whatever, we have to be able to manage that in a proper godly way. This tax collector was seen praying. Pharisee saw him, right?
Yeah.
He was able to point right at him.
It wasn't like he was in his closet not seeing it, right? Like he was at the temple to pray. He was
at the temple to pray, but he wasn't doing it in such a way to cause himself to be seen. And not that he was hiding his faith or hiding his devotion or hiding his prayer, but unlike the Pharisee who stood up, dressed in the fancy clothes, spoke out loud so that everybody could hear him, and was obviously doing that so that he could be heard and thought of as holy and thought of as righteous and thought of as all those things. And so, how do we balance that? What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting too when you read that there, right? That the narrative of their prayer, right? And Jesus will pick up on this in other places. The Pharisees' prayer is, "Hey, I thank you that I'm good. I thank you that I'm perfect, and I thank you that I really don't need anything from you, God." Right? Whereas the Pharisees, the tax payers, have mercy on me, a sinner. In other places, Jesus will say, right, when they say, "Oh, are we blind?" And he says, "No, no, no, because if you were, if you're not, you would understand that you do not see, but you are blind, and so you're in your sin," right? The healthy need no need of a physician, right? But it's those who are sick that need a physician, right? So we see this over and over again. That one of their problems is this idea that they don't actually think they need anything from God. They think that they've gotten everything from God, right? I have been blessed in this way. That's why I am the way I am. That's why I'm wealthy as I am. And so I don't need anything from you. And so, sure, I say thanks. But my thanks is, again, it's almost backhanded in its nature, right? I thank you that, and this is something that strikes me as well a lot of times, more and more in our modern society, we've tribalized into the fact of there's me and there's others, right? There's people like me, and there's my group, and there's the others are my enemy. And that's what this guy is doing, right? I thank you that I am not like other men, right? An extortioner or unjust or adulterers or, even like this just tax collector guy over here, right? But what was he thanking him for? I thank you that I'm not like other men. I'm better than them, right? Is effectively his prayer. Thank you, God, for making me better than my neighbor. And, we very, very easily fall into this trap. I mean, it's just blasted at you 24/7. Right, that those people are your problem, those people are your enemy, this is whatever, this is right? And that's exactly what this Pharisee was doing. Thank you, God, for making me better than everyone else. And, hey, I'm just so glad that I'm not this or that or the other, or, and look, insert whatever you want here, right? That I don't struggle with addiction. I'm so thankful that, and that's fine. It's great for me to praise God that I don't struggle with addiction, right? But that's not the Pharisee's mindset. The Pharisee's mindset is, and I'm better than those who do. Right. And so this is his problem here, that he says, look, and Jesus makes that clear because he's exalted self, right? He has put himself up and put the others down in so doing. And he says, you got to do the reverse, right?
And obviously we don't have any context for the rich man and Lazarus, the rich man aspect of it. But we know that he didn't do anything for his fellow
He did nothing for Lazarus. We know that much, right?
We know that for sure.
Yeah.
But the statement that Jesus makes that whoever exalts himself will be humbled, that's kind of the result we see there with the rich man and Lazarus. He was humbled.
Yeah, and that story is really interesting there too, again, because the thing that Abraham says is, you got your good things in your life, which really should make me kind of think, right? If my whole life is good and great my whole life and I never suffer at all for anything, I better watch out, right? Maybe there's a reason that's going that way, and I'm not going to get any good things after this, right? But yeah, that story, that prayer is, again, one we should watch out for. And, it just keeps going from there, right? You get the rich ruler immediately after that, right? The rich ruler comes. And, that one's one where when you look at that, it's this idea there that he comes and he's seeking something, and Jesus says, hey, the commandments, do this. And he's excited. This is great. And Jesus says, hey, man, listen. And when Jesus heard this, he said, listen, there's one thing only that you lack, right? And if you would do this, I want to give you the next level kind of thing, right? And he goes away sad. Their statement, again, who can be saved then, right? If even the rich cannot be saved. And we have this mindset in this country that if someone is rich, they must be good at everything. They must be extra smart. They must be extra savvy. They must be extra whatever, right?
They must be blessed by God and therefore approved of.
And if they can't do it, right, who have all these things, then who can, right, make that happen? That was the mindset then. It's still the mindset now, right? That, and it just bleeds over into everything. I don't want to get into too much politics of stuff. But, more and more we've kind of said, look, if people are wealthy and rich, they must be really smart, and we should give them other things to run and do and whatever, even though they may have shown no aptitude for any of that, right? And that's what's going on here, right? This man is wealthy, and so his disciples say, hey, if this guy can't make it, who can, right? And Jesus' answer, right? What's impossible with man is possible with God. And so his statement there is, it's impossible for all of you. Rich, poor, doesn't matter. It's impossible for all of you. It's only possible with God. And, I like Peter jumping in there, right? hey, we did leave everything, man. Like, what's in it for us, right? We did leave
What about
everything to
us?
follow
Hey.
you, right? And it's just classic
Yeah.
sort of Peter there. And Jesus is kind to him this time, right?
He
Truly
is.
I say, no one has left these things, but will receive many times more in this life and in the age to come eternal life, right?
Yeah.
So you'll get yours. Don't worry about it, Peter.
Well, one of the brethren at church, I think it was a devotional or a Lord's Supper talk. I think it was yesterday, but he actually brought up the rich man and no, the rich young ruler.
Yeah.
And Jesus, he said, something to the effect of, Jesus could have said after his response, well, yeah, I've done all those things from my youth. Jesus could have said, good job, and then just went on his way.
Left him, right. Well, good. Do you know what you need to do? That's what you need to do.
Perfect.
Go ahead. Right, yeah.
Well done.
You're doing good. Yeah. Right.
Keep it up. But no, Jesus saw to the heart of the matter, and he said, listen, you've only been doing surface level, checking boxes,
Yeah.
The real thing is you need to be able to give and understand that none of that's yours.
Yeah, trust me, right? Give all that up and trust me. You kind of make the point sometimes about how Jesus is always doing these things, but then he's teaching his disciples at the same time, right? I'm curious sometimes if he doesn't give that task to this guy because he wants to make the point about the difficulty of riches in this life. Yeah. And so he tells the man, hey, you want to have it all, do this, right? Knowing that the guy is going to go away sad because he has much possessions. And then he can say to his disciples, look, man, it's really hard, right? I'm trying to teach you something about this and how this goes. This is an important thing you need to hear.
Yep.
You need to hear here.
You made a point off camera about the next little episode here. And the fact that we have this blind beggar.
Yeah.
There seems to be a slight difference between whether it was coming out of Jericho or leading up to Jericho.
Yeah.
But regardless, the way Luke puts this in these orders, now all of these events took place.
Yeah.
It's not as important if it's chronologically accurate or whatever. We know that there was a blind man that called out to Jesus.
Yeah, Mark gives us his name, right? His name is Bartimaeus. Right? He's the son of Timaeus. And we got his history and everything. Yeah.
But the fact that Jesus puts this, or Luke puts this in the order of somebody who couldn't see Jesus calling out and wanting to see Jesus. And then we have this chapter break, and 19 starts off with a little dude who couldn't see Jesus because he was short.
Yeah, you kind of put those, and really all three of them together, right? So you have three come seeking Jesus, right? Back to back to back. The rich ruler comes to seek Jesus. The blind beggar, he doesn't really come to seek Jesus. He hears him going by, and when he hears, then he goes, oh, hey, because he's blind, right? So when he hears that Jesus is there, now he's seeking him, right? And he's calling out, and he's trying to get them, and people are trying to tell him to be quiet, and he won't listen to them, but he calls out all the more. So he's seeking Jesus. And then the next story is Zacchaeus wants to seek Jesus or see Jesus. And so those narratives are sort of structured in a way in that order. One man comes physically seeking wisdom from Jesus. Another one comes literally wanting to see Jesus and receive a blessing from him. And then the third one is Zacchaeus, who just wants to catch a glimpse, right? Like, I'm just curious kind of what's this all about, right? And in that one, Jesus effectively seeks him, right? Because he doesn't, both the previous two sort of approach Jesus, but in this case, Jesus approaches the man. And so he wants to see him. He's short, so he climbs this tree, and then Jesus calls him out, right?
It wasn't just any tree.
Yeah, it was a sycamore fig,
sycamore tree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Because how do we know that? Not because we've read it, Kevin. Because we
it's
were
in the
taught.
Song. That's right. He climbed up in a
the
sycamore tree to see what he could
extraordinarily
see.
unfortunate song of Zacchaeus.
That's right. Yes. He was a wee little man.
Wee little man.
Wee little man was he.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fun song, and I remember singing it as a kid, having a great time. But now that as an adult I think about that song, I'm like, oh, poor Zacchaeus.
Oh, you remember out of his whole life, right?
And the only thing everybody remembers, he's a wee little man,
Yeah.
It is a great story because
it is because
on one hand you have the rich young ruler.
Yeah, and they bookend, right? They bookend.
Super rich guy. Jesus tells him, "Hey, what's keeping you back is you love your stuff too much." Basically.
Yeah, sell your stuff. Get rid of your stuff.
Right?
Yep.
Zacchaeus comes. He's a tax collector, a chief tax collector, which means he gets a commission off all the other tax collectors plus whatever he collects, right?
Yeah.
So we don't know exactly what kind of an exchange happened. Maybe it was enough that Jesus says, Zacchaeus, I know you. I'm going to your house today.
Yeah.
And he goes, whoa.
Yeah.
Overwhelmed with faith. Who knows what happened between Zacchaeus, and the transformation that occurred. If there was more, we don't know.
Yeah.
But what we do know is that Zacchaeus immediately recognized, kind of like Peter did when they were collecting all the fish, and says, "Get back! Get away from me! I am an unclean man, Lord. I can't be in your presence because you are too awesome." I think that's probably kind of what Zacchaeus happened.
Yeah, it says that he hurried, came down, and received him joyfully, right?
Yeah.
And so certainly he does that. And here, right, the people begin to grumble, and he says, "Listen, half my goods I give to the poor, and if I defraud it anyway, I'll restore fourfold," right? And so it's this contrast between how the other man who's called to get rid of his stuff won't, and this one who is not does, right?
Yeah. Jesus didn't tell Zacchaeus, "Hey,
Yeah.
you're super rich. You also need to sell
Your stuff.
So it's not the fact that he was rich that was the problem. It was all about the attitude.
Yeah, and it's interesting there too because it says the other man went away sorrowful, right? And here the contrast is Zacchaeus receives him joyfully, right? So we get this other sort of contrast that's going on in how they come together, right?
Yep.
And Jesus' thing is, and this is subtle, but that Jesus says, "I must stay at your house." And then after he says these things, the people grumble and he wants to give away his stuff. Jesus says, "Today salvation has come to his house." Well, who was going to his house? Jesus was, right? And so he says, "Today salvation has come because that's me, right? I'm salvation. And I'm coming to him. He is also a son of Abraham, right?
Yeah.
And the Son of Man came to seek and save those who were lost," right? So he admits he is lost, right? They say this man's gone to be the guest of a sinner. He doesn't say, no, he's not. Right? He says, "You're right, he is, but that's what I came to do," right? And salvation has come to this one who's a sinner here.
Exactly. So just so that we can make sure we cover all the way through 23. Really quick, we have the parable of the talents, or the 10 minas in Luke's account. The triumphal entry, which we've covered quite a bit in the past. Jesus' attitude about Jerusalem, how he just weeps over Jerusalem and how lost they are, and he also is understanding of what's coming to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
In the future, the destruction of Jerusalem. He talks about that quite a bit.
And this one is different, like you said. This is one of the few things that's different. Luke 19 has some differences. Zacchaeus is here. We don't see that in other accounts.
Yep.
This weeping over Jerusalem is different. Here it's like, "Oh, how I would have wanted to gather you as a hen does her chicks, but you would not listen."
Right.
And here you sort of get the mournfulness of that because he says, "I would that even you had known on this day the things that make for peace, but they're hidden. The days are coming, the enemies are going to do this thing and destroy you and tear it down." So why is he weeping over them? Because he knows the destruction is coming, which we don't see in the other Gospels, that's partly why he's weeping over it, but that Luke makes clear to us.
Well, he talks quite a bit in Matthew 24, obviously, we discussed a while back.
Yeah, when they say, "Look at all the things," right? He details that.
He goes into great detail about the prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem that he talks about there. But it is interesting, the correlation between Jesus having that emotional reaction about Jerusalem, knowing what's coming, being sorrowful for the women who are pregnant, the women who are nursing, those, all those types of things. And so it's another insight to just how compassionate Jesus was all the time. So we get into chapter 20. He's now teaching in the temple.
Yeah.
And the scribes and Pharisees are seeking a way to destroy him, and he had that interchange, by who gave you the authority to do all these things? Well, I'll tell you if you answer one question.
Yeah, about the baptism of John. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
There's another interesting thing here with these two chapters back to back. You get the parable of the 10 minas there, which is like the 10 talent parable, but slightly different. And the difference that he points out is when he's going to go. The reason he leaves these 10 talents is because he's going off to receive a kingdom. And we get this weird aside that some of those servants didn't want him to be king. Right, and when he comes back and he settles up, just like the talent story, the one who had 10 was 10, and 5 was 5, and 1 was hit it, and all that stuff. And then we have that all play out just like it does. And then he says, "And now those ones who didn't want me to king, bring them here and slay them before me." Right, and that's interesting because the very next time he's telling this parable is about, let me tell you about a man had a vineyard and he lent it out to some tenants. Right, and guess what? They didn't like his authority. And so all of these parables are kind of wrapped around that statement on the authority of Jesus. And so when you look at this parable is about what? How they wouldn't receive his authority that he had, right? They didn't want him to be king over them. They don't want him to be the owner of the vineyard here. And they pick up on it because they say, when he says this, when the others heard this, they said, "Surely not." right? Surely not. This, you can't be talking about us, that we're clearly the vineyard people. We're clearly the tenant. We get this. And then Jesus basically cites Old Testament to them, right? Saying, well, if that wasn't going to happen, then what does this mean, right? The stone that the builders rejected has become the head cornerstone, right?
Yep.
This is what's coming, right?
That's in chapter 20, verse 17, by the way, if you're
Yeah.
following along. So
This is what's coming for you, right? And so
Yeah.
this whole thing around this conflict of Jesus' authority, of his kingship, of his whether or not, by whose authority do you do these things, right? All of this
Yep.
is directed right at the scribes and the chief priests and these kinds of people. And you know that because the very next thing is, so then the scribes and chief priests decide how can we sort of capture him and lay hands on him. And so then you get all these things we've seen before, right? About, the trapping him in his
taxes to
words.
Caesar,
Yeah.
and the Sadducees and their question about the resurrection, whose wife will she be?
Yep.
And then, Jesus warns again, beware of the scribes, who desire to go around in long robes, love greetings in the marketplaces, best seats in the synagogues, the best places at feasts. So again, kind of like that tax collector or the Pharisee versus the tax collector in the temple praying.
Yeah.
Another example of how they are only seeking the attention and praise of men and not God, and they're doubling down on all of their riches here. So.
Yeah, and that they're going to receive the greater condemnation because of that, right?
Yeah.
And then, perhaps, as we sort of sum up that section there, it's like he did previously. We've seen in other ones. We get the widow's offering, right?
Yeah.
And how the thing that she puts in out of her poverty, the 2 small copper coins she puts in there, he says, this is put in more than all of them because she gave all that she had, right? She's given out of her poverty where they gave out of their abundance. And so we get that sort of teaching there about, which starts, I say that only in context of this week's reading, right? Starts with the rich man coming to Jesus and kind of comes to a head here with the widow and her offering and all the sort of things he's done in between there to kind of lay out and build that up for how that will go there. And then, here we get a similar in 21, a similar thing before of, hey, they see all these things, right? And the noble offerings, the things, and he then tells the story of before, right? You see all this stuff, it's going to be torn down. When will this thing happen? And so it's much shorter in Luke's account here, but it's that same parallel passage to like Matthew 24 and stuff where he's talking about the destruction of these things after they've said, look at all these great buildings and all the marvelous things. And so they kind of we get the Luke's version of that effectively here. I know you want to talk a little bit though about like 22, 23 as we kind of get into this sort of like idea of betrayal that kind of comes up.
Well, I think it's important, mainly I've been hyper-focused lately in my studies, sermon prep and things like that, with the humanity of Jesus. And knowing and really just picking up on the fact and really trying to understand that Jesus was also fully a human. Your mother-in-law, Donna, actually commented about, I think it was here in Luke 22, how touching it is that Jesus was so weary and so heavy, but God, being such a loving Father, sent angels to comfort him, and all these things, but just trying to really understand and wrap your mind around all the things that Jesus went through emotionally on an interpersonal relationship level. You start with Peter. Well, in previous accountings, you have Peter right up to the point where Jesus says, the final time, hey, it's time. We're going to Jerusalem, where I'm going to be killed. If I were telling you, hey, Kevin, my cancer has come full circle. I have 2 days to live. And you just say, whatever, that's not going to happen.
Right.
That's not what I want to hear.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to hear that. I want you to wrap your arms around me and comfort me and tell me how much, I've meant to you in my I don't want I don't want rebuke or chastisement. I need you to support me through my final moments, but that's not. So we have that with Peter. And then you have Judas, who Jesus knew the whole time, but listen, he was right there with them.
Yeah,
he was a participant. He was there. They had to have had, good relationship building moments. We don't have that recorded necessarily.
Sure.
But he was part of the 12, part of the inner circle.
Yeah.
And he sought, Satan. It's in one account it says Satan got into his heart, and
that's here in Luke, right? Satan
Luke,
entered
right?
Judas Iscariot, who was of the 12. Yep.
So at that point on, Judas was seeking an opportunity. Again, not focused on the spiritual aspects, but focusing on, hey, what Jesus, he didn't want to take that alabaster potion and put it in the coffers. I need them. I'm focused about the money.
Right.
I bet you I can get some money from those chief priests. And who knows what went through on in his head, leading him to that decision. But you talk about levels of betrayal.
Yeah, and
everybody left him at the end.
That's right. And the betrayal is always interesting to me. In what was Judas actually doing, right? What did they confer for? What was Judas's role? What was his job, right? I mean, it wasn't to identify Jesus, because they know who Jesus is, right? They've seen him, they know him by sight. But here, Luke gives us this clear picture that he consented and sought an opportunity to betray him to them in absence of the crowd, right?
Right.
So effectively, what his job was to find a time when the crowd wasn't going to be around that they could get to Jesus. Right, because over and over again we've seen that they feared the people.
Afraid of the people.
We've seen that even in this reading here in Luke. And so we get this, he's going to do that. I'll sell him out to you when the crowd is not around, when you can actually take him without sort of repercussion. And, that kind of starts this section here of 22. But then the whole thing, the chapter is just packed, right? You have this, then you have the Passover, then it's just Lord's Supper, then all the way down to the arrest and even he's before the council as you look at that. And so in this whole chapter, you're going to get Peter's denial. I think it's in this account where he says that, in 22:31, right, while they're at the Lord's Supper, effectively, he's been instituting these things, he just turns to Peter and says, hey, Satan has demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat, right? And that's kind of what prompts in this account, Peter to say, hey, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death. And he says, no, you're going to betray me. You're going to deny me 3 times, right? And then we get that betrayal of Peter, right? And before that, we get all the disciples scattering, right? Like all these things, the chapter is full of betrayal. It, literally, I'm selling you out, to I've abandoned you, to I deny you, right? Over and over again, we get this message throughout that chapter, and then the repercussions of that, or the result of that, then is effectively the trial, right? That takes place. The fact that Jesus is given over, the fact that he is, and look, don't get me wrong, Jesus, nothing happens he doesn't want to, right? But the physical manifestation of that, the physical way that actually happens, is because all of his betray him, right? Because all of them abandon him, because the crowds are not there, because the people are not there, and as we keep going on, you'll get who do they call for? They call for Barabbas, right? Well, crucify this Jesus, right? So the crowd even turns on him, right? Now, Matthew kind of demonstrates for us it's because they've been infiltrated by the priests and stuff, and they've said, hey, call for this person. But the crowd turns on him. Everyone betrays him and leaves him. And the interesting exception to that we get in Luke's account as well is he makes it clear, except for the women, right? They're there looking at the cross. They are there, which we'll talk about more when we kind of look at that. But they're the only ones that we don't sort of see that. And then after the crucifixion happens, we start to slowly get this turning, right? In Luke's account, we get Joseph who will come and he will want to do this service for him, right? These women who want to come and do. So we start to get these turnabout, if you will. But it all follows the betrayal, which is kind of an interesting picture, if you will, of sort of the original fall, right? Mankind betrays God, right? Mankind breaks his law, he betrays him, he turns about, it leads to this death, it leads to this bad thing. And then the result of that afterwards is then there are some of these blessings that start to turn around. We see this whole story kind of leading towards the return, right, and the redemption of mankind. And here we see it playing out in microcosm, right? Joseph of Arimathea comes and he does this thing for him, right? One who was a secret disciple is now emboldened to go and ask for the body, right? The women are not fearing the guards or the hardship or whatever they may see. They're going to do this thing for him when they go to the resurrection site. And so, yeah, it's an interesting sort of parallel there of the fall and redemption story as a whole.
Yeah, it's super touching to me. And if you just allow yourself to be open to the fact that Jesus really felt these things, and he wasn't protected because of his divinity.
Yeah.
He emptied himself to became a man. He felt all those things, and he was hurt by them. In fact, in Luke's accounting here, even though there was an angel appeared from heaven strengthening him, he says, and being in agony,
yeah.
in the same and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly.
Yeah.
When's the last time we've been in agony or agonizing over something? to the point where we are just like wet pouring out of us.
Yeah.
You know, I can't imagine what it would be like to be in that psychological state, that emotional state, so scared, so hurt, so I have no words for it.
Yeah.
But he did it anyway. You know, and that's really what the phrase that kept coming up to me when I was doing that sermon prep for the humanity of Jesus is that he did it anyway. And yet Jesus did it anyway. Despite the pain, despite the fear, despite the betrayal, despite everything, because of two things: love for us and a knowledge of his throne waiting for him in heaven. And those two things are what we are supposed to embolden in this life. And those are the lessons that time and time again, Jesus says, and Paul reiterates this over and over again, put your mind on the future of heaven. And we talked about it last year in Colossians. Set your mind on things above, where Christ is. He's there as our advocate, as our high priest, as our perfect sacrifice. And he embodied, while he was a man, love for us and a focus on heaven.
Yeah.
And that will see us through everything.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a good place maybe to end there, right? Is that's sort of the picture of what we're called to do there. And you see that over and over and over again. I was just looking at Hebrews again, in Hebrews chapter 10, when he finally gets to his point there, the author, about why maybe they were going back into the old law was to avoid this suffering, right, that they're going to do. And he says, I want you to remember back to when you were first converted and the things you endured. You endured reproach. You endured the taking of your property. You stood with those who suffered the same, even if you didn't. And when he talks about that, you endured the sort of the seizing of your property, he says, and you did it joyfully because you recognized that there is a greater treasure, right? That those things are unimportant. They're just sort of the same thing you're saying there, right? That Jesus has his mind fixed on the future reward, if you will, the future glorification that's coming. And, we saw that here again in Luke when he tells them, right, whoever humbles himself will be exalted, but he exalts himself will be humbled. Yeah. And so we see Jesus play that out here in the actual arrest and crucifixion. He humbles himself. And the result is what we'll see next week in the resurrection and the exaltation, right?
Yep. So to finish out 23, we do see the death of Jesus,
the death,
our Lord.
And the burial. Yep, that's how it ends up there, right? And it's interesting that it just happened to break out this way this week, right? That we're ending on this thing here where they did, right? We're right at this point of, and then what happened, right? And on the Sabbath day they rested according to the commandment, right? They didn't go the next day to do the thing because it was the Sabbath, and so they rested. Mm-hmm. But they had all their stuff ready, right? All the spices prepared. We're going to do this for them as soon as the Sabbath rolls over to the first day of the week.
Yeah, it's a great place to end, but I do know that chapter 22 ended abruptly for me. I don't know if anybody noticed in the reading and in the recording. I expected it to keep going, and I did not end like I normally would end with proper inflection and
tone, right? What else do we need? We've heard it from his own lips, and they all agreed and said, right? Yeah, that's yeah.
And then the music starts playing. It's
Yeah, it does, right? Because you kind of expect it. And all the crowd agreed and said, you're right, guilty, right? But we don't get that. That's it. Right.
Too funny. So I'm enjoying reading. I hope you guys are appreciating the efforts there. And it's not just to put it out there for, I don't have to record all this, but I'm hoping it's being beneficial for everybody. And, it helps me. So I'm going to keep doing it. So, but listen to Jesus, try to be like Jesus, love your neighbors, be more sacrificial, and focus on heaven. Can't beat that lesson.
That's right.
So, all right, God bless you, everybody. We will see you tomorrow with the beginning of next week.